Good enough.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of Wharfdale Naturalists, the first in the new winter programme. Of course, in many respects, I'm very sorry that we are having to meet again in this format rather than in Christchurch altogether. And we had hoped that there would be able to be a real live programme this autumn, but we've decided that it's probably not sensible to kick that off just yet. So here we are back on Zoom. Though personally, I'm actually rather pleased that we're doing things on Zoom at the moment, because I'm in Denmark, which is something you won't be able to tell merely from the Zoom screen. But I wouldn't have been able to hear tonight's talk, or indeed any of the others before Christmas, had we reverted to our normal Christchurch venue. So I, for one, I'm pleased in that respect that we're doing things this way. I expect most of you have been to these events before and you know the drill. But just in case there's anyone here who's new, first of all, welcome. If you're new, it's always lovely to have guests and new members. There will be some time at the end for some questions. If you would like to ask a question, we ask that you put the question in the chat, just so that Jeff, who will be chairing the question part of the evening, can sort of order the questions, collect ones that are about similar issues together, that sort of thing, and get a sensible running order. So if you would like
sorry, Helen.
Yeah.
Could questions go in the Q&A, please?
Sorry, I'm sorry.
In
the Q&A. In the Q&A. Ignore what I said about the chat. I get them mixed up with one another, and I keep forgetting which one is the one that we're supposed to be using. So it's the Q&A. Apologies. Okay, well, without further ado, let me introduce tonight's speaker, who is Sue Stevens, who will be known, I'm sure, to some of you already. Sue's local. She's lived in Ilkley since 1991. She was a paediatrician at Leeds Infirmary, retired from that position in 2013, and went off to work intermittently in Africa, where she taught and practiced paediatrics in Zambia, also Kenya and Uganda. And then returned back to Ilkley in 2017. She became interested in plants, and she did a course on plant identification that was being run by Manchester Met, became interested in botany as a result of that course, and joined the botany group of Wharfdale Naturalist Society. What a good idea. Then, after a visit to the Botanical Gardens in Cambridge, where there's a tree trail around the exotic trees, Neil is Sue's husband, and Sue together became interested in tree trails and developed the idea of constructing a tree trail or trails around Ilkley. And they have together been developing tree trails since last summer. And working on those tree trails has made Sue and Neil realise how important the contribution of trees is to the character of a town. And Sue's talk tonight is called Ilkley Trees, Our Urban Forest. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing about the experience of devising the tree trails. Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Helen, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the meeting. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so as Helen says, Neil and I have spent our time in lockdown developing tree trails around Ilkley, and doing this really opened our eyes to the variety and number of trees in Ilkley, how important they are for the town and how important it is to care for them. And so what I'm going to talk about tonight is a bit about the tree trails that we've designed, but then I want to talk about the urban forest and whether the UK has significant urban forests, what the benefits are, what do we have in Ilkley, who looks after our trees, and what is actually happening to our trees. So starting with the tree trails, the first one of these was Introduction to Trees over on the left-hand side. And this came out last summer and is a circular walk around trees, starting at the Manor House, going through East Holmesfield and around the Lido. That was mainly based on leaves for identification. So it was no good once the leaves came off the trees. So then we went on to the second one, Trees in Winter, which was a selection of trees from the first trail. Then this summer, we published our third trail, Ilkley Town Centre Trees. And just a few weeks ago, the fourth one came out, which is Darwin Gardens and the Lower Moor. And that starts in Darwin Gardens and goes up to White Wells and onto the Upper Tarn, down to the Lower Tarn and back to Darwin Gardens. 3 of these are published in booklet form. The Trees in Winter is only online, as at the time this came out, there was nowhere to distribute leaflets due to lockdown. The booklets are available from the Grove Bookshop and the Ilkley Visitor Centre. They're free, or they can all be downloaded from our website, which is ilkleytrees.org.uk. You can download them to your phone, and it's quite easy to follow them around on the phone. But if you do that, it's a good idea to print a copy of the map off first. The trails seem to have been very popular, and I'd like to thank Bruce Brown and Heather from Wharfdale Nats, who've been helpful with tree identification and suggestions. And I'd also like to thank the people who have sponsored the printing. So we've had help from Climate Action Ilkley. We've had individuals who've donated. The U3A funded one print run, Commute Cafe another, and the last 2 have been funded by Wharfdale Nats. So thank you all very much for that. So what is an urban forest? There's a number of different definitions, but the one that's usually used is all the trees within an urban district. So that includes woods near housing, parks, gardens, riverbanks, street trees, pocket parks, and private gardens. Does the UK have significant urban forests? Well, I want to take a step back from that and look at not just urban trees, but trees all over the UK. So if you just look at the green bars, this is trees in the UK over time. And our greatest tree cover was probably about 6000 BC, when 75% of the land was covered in trees. By the early Bronze Age, we were down to 50% tree cover. By the time William the Conqueror got here, we were down to 15%. And we kept cutting trees down, so by 1900s, down to just 5% tree cover. Then there was a bit of recovery, so now we're up to 13% tree cover. That might sound good, but some of that was due to large conifer plantations, many of which were planted in the wrong place. So 13% for the whole of the UK. If you just look at England, that's the blue box, we only have 10% tree cover. So how does that compare with the rest of the world? So if you look at the yellow bars, Japan I always think of as having very big cities full of millions of people, and yet 68% of Japan is covered with trees. And in the EU, tree cover is 35%, China 22%. So our tree cover over the whole country is really poor compared to the rest of the world. What about if we just look at urban trees? Do we do any better there? There aren't that many studies on urban trees. I've picked out 3 here. First 2 are from the United States and the third from England. The studies aren't directly comparable because they use slightly different methodology. But you see from the United States studies that many big cities around the world have tree cover of 20, 30% plus. Paris is fairly typical of Europe, having 26% tree cover. The third study is an English study done using something called iTree Canopy, which is an app based on Google Earth data. And this study was done in 2017 and looked at almost 300 English towns. The average tree cover was 16.4%, so not very good. There are some leafy places down south, like Farnham, which have very high tree cover. London, not too bad at 19.6%, but as you go further north and east, tree cover gets less and less. So Leeds 17.4%, Bradford 11%. And as you go out to the coast, tree cover is very poor. Fleetwood being the worst with just 3.3%. Just to show you what these tree canopy studies look like on a map. So this is Leeds urban district. This was produced by Leeds University, who've done a lot of work on urban trees. And the more blue, the deeper the blue, the more trees there are. So you won't be surprised to hear that in Leeds area, Moortown and Roundhay in the middle here have the highest tree cover. And places like Gipton and Beeston hardly have any trees. I can't find a similar study for Bradford. Do urban forests matter? Well, only 8% of the land in England is urban, so you might say urban trees can't be that important. But 83% of the population live in urban areas. So for many people, urban trees are the only trees they come in contact with. The government thinks it's important. They've allocated £10 million to plant 130,000 urban trees by next year. That works out at £77 a tree. That's actually not a huge amount. It's plenty if you're planting a tree in a field, but an urban tree is really very expensive. It costs many hundreds of pounds to plant one. A lot of towns and cities around the world have urban forest plans or are developing them, and that many towns and cities abroad are way ahead of us. San Francisco has an amazing urban tree plan. But towns in this country are starting to develop plans. And why is that? Why are urban trees important? Well, there are a huge number of reasons why we should have trees in our towns. I think people think straight away about carbon storage and climate change for trees, which is important, but trees in cities are not going to save us from the climate crisis. So there's got to be other reasons why they're good. And one thing is improved air quality. So particularly particulate matter that's coming out of car exhausts and industrial units, they stick to the leaves of trees, particularly conifers like Scots pine and silver birch. And trees also absorb ozone, sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide. So it's a big improvement to air quality if you have trees. Flood defence, also very important. Rainwater is absorbed by all parts of the tree as it falls to prevent some of it hitting the ground, and that does hit the ground is taken up by the roots, and because of the way the roots penetrate the soil, it increases the soil absorption of water too. The trees will also take out nasty chemicals in the water, so they improve water quality. Reduced heat island effect. Some of our big cities have temperatures that are way above the surrounding countryside, particularly so in London. You might think it's not a problem here, but with climate change, maybe Ilkley will become too hot. Trees reduce the heat island effect and provide shade, and because of transpiration, help to cool the atmosphere. They reduce noise, they stop wind tunnels forming. They raise property value, which may not be a particular benefit, but houses in tree-lined streets sell for more, and more people will visit towns that have trees in their centre. They spend longer there, they'll sit at cafes, spend money in the cafes, and they'll spend more money in the shops. So it's an economic advantage to have trees. Huge benefits to health, mental health and physical health. Reduces stress, anxiety, gives people a sense of place. They look very attractive, and perhaps most important of all, they allow an increase in biodiversity. We're destroying so much of our natural habitats. It's good to have a refuge for some of these creatures in our towns. And for Ilkley, it's important to have a green corridor so that even if creatures don't want to live in the town, they can traverse from the river up to the moor. So lots of reasons for having trees. So this is Bradford, and Ilkley is here, it's number 14 at the top here. The green on this map shows areas of woodland in the Bradford district, and you see the largest area of green is just here. This is just outside Ilkley, but it's the River Edge plantation that you can see up on the moor. And this is an example of bad tree planting, because this was planted on peat bog. And peatland is actually more important for conserving carbon than trees. And the trees that have been planted here will never replace the carbon that was lost by destroying the peat. But that's outside our area. So this is Ilkley. We've got Middleton Wood up here. Hebbersgill and Panorama Woods here. Wheatley Raikes over here. St Margaret's Wood in the middle here. And there's quite a lot of woodland up here by the old monastery. I think this is private. All the other woodlands I've mentioned are owned by the council. I'm just going to go through some of these woodlands. So our most important wood is Middleton Wood. It's our biggest, and it's ancient semi-natural woodland. It's the only example of ancient semi-natural woodland in West Yorkshire. There have been trees here since 1600 at least, and it's a good mix of native trees, but the dominant species is oak. Now this is a stubborn oak, and as you can see, it's not actually in the wood anymore. So this bit of wood was cut down for housing some time ago, but this tree was preserved. I assume there were plenty of other oaks that were taken down. But this is our oldest tree in Ilkley. It's 500 years old. Also a lot of hazel in Middleton Wood. You're probably all familiar with the hazel catkins. I wonder how many of you have seen the little red flowers here out in March. And it's not only the trees that are important in Middleton Wood. We have an amazing woodland flora there. We've got the anemones, out in March, followed by the bluebells in May. And they're both indicators of ancient woodland. Going over to Hebbers Gill. So the Victorians were responsible for the pathway going up by the beck and the little bridges crossing it. And they wanted to go there to get to the Chalybead Spring at the top, the Iron Rich Spring, which the Friends of Ilkley Moor have just revamped. Hebbers Gill is an ancient woodland, but it's got a good mix of native and non-native trees. There's some sweet chestnut there. And there's larch, both of which are non-native. The management plan of Bradford Council is actually to take out some of the larch because it is very dominant on the western side. And they're hoping that more native species will regenerate there, and possibly they'll plant some native species. The other reason for taking out larch is that it's very susceptible to a destructive fungus that's spreading up the country from the south and has reached Bradford. And although it predominantly kills larch, it will kill other trees. It will kill the sweet chestnuts, which it's currently doing in the south of England. And a host for the fungus is rhododendron. So that's one reason to take rhododendron out. Over in Ben Ridding, we've got Wheatley Raikes. This is a mix of native and non-native trees. And the plan there is to leave it alone, except to take out the bamboo, which has become quite invasive there. We've got St Margaret's Park or Wood in the middle. A bit controversial about whether it's a park or a wood. It started out life as a park, but it's now mainly conifer woodland. It's got an interesting tree in the middle. This is an oak tree with a plaque. The plaque is almost worn out, but it was planted in 1902 for the coronation of Edward VII. So up on the moor, we've got pockets of woodland. These were planted by the Victorians, mostly Scots and black pine. There's a few birch in there. Got a group of larch to the west of the swastika stone, and a group of sycamore above White Wells, also non-native. But although these are planted trees, not native to the moor, they've become landmarks and people are very attached to them. What's more controversial is the trees that are growing up on the lower moor. These are mostly self-seeded, hawthorn, rowan and birch. And this is a natural progression of heathland to woodland. But there's controversy as to whether they should be allowed to stay or be removed, because the moor is an SSI because of ground nesting birds. Ground nesting birds obviously don't particularly want trees, but I don't think there's any ground nesting birds nesting down here because too many people and dogs about. I think the plan, and Owen will correct me if this is wrong, but I think the plan is that these trees should stay, but some of the non-native species, particularly invasive species like rhododendron, will be taken out. It would be extremely expensive to remove all those trees. So down by the river, we've got some interesting trees. This is a stone pine. It's on the North River bank, just west of the old bridge. Quite unusual. Bruce tells me there's only one other one anywhere near here, and that's up by Dick Hudson's. By the river in Eastholm Field, we've got the black poplars. These are really quite rare trees now. We've got 4 huge ones with a lot of little saplings. And we know these are black poplars and not hybrids because of this. A lot of the leaves have this spiral gall on them, which is caused by an aphid living in there, and they only occur on black poplars. And then we have a lot of common trees by the river, common but very important. A lot of crack willow, which is important for stabilising the riverbank and providing shade for fish. Then moving on to our parks, gardens, open spaces. We've got Riverside Park, East and West Holmesfield, Memorial Gardens, Spence Gardens, and the Lido area. So in Riverside Park, we've got a magnificent ash behind the manor house. It's a beautiful tree. It has got early signs of ash dieback. And many of our trees in Ilkley are already badly affected. So this is a tree by the cricket club, which has severe ash dieback. We've got a lot of ash in Ilkley. It's a lot down in the park, and 95% of our ash are going to die in the next 10 years or so. We have a lot of copper beech. This is one in East Holmesfield, but there's a lot around Ilkley, a lot planted in private gardens. Victorians and Edwardians were very keen on these dark trees, so we've got plenty of them. And then we've got some unusual trees in East Holmesfield, like this Mitchell's Tibetan white beam, which is like a common white beam, but the leaves are massive and it has huge fruits which go red in the autumn. It's very attractive. I don't know how many of you have ever looked at the trees behind the tennis court. We've got some lovely aspen there. These really pretty leaves with stems flattened at right angles to the leaves, which allows the leaves to quiver in the wind so that they're always rustling, even in just a very light breeze. And I say we've got a lot of aspen there. It's probably just one clonal colony. There's a huge colony of aspen in North America, said to be the biggest living organism in the world, estimated to weigh 6 million kilograms. I don't think ours will get that big. Just around the corner from that, we've got Western red cedar. They have these tiny but very pretty flower-like cones, and if you rub the leaves, it smells strongly of pineapple. And then in front of the swimming pool, we've got some cockspur thorn. These are related to hawthorn. They have these very long thorns, like the spur on a cock's leg. And the trees go red in the autumn and have masses of red berries. They're very pretty. Moving closer into the centre, we've got Memorial Gardens. So these were developed in the early 1920s, and the lime trees were planted then. So they're 100 years old now. In the right-hand corner, we've got this huge horse chestnut. Its girth is over 4 meters. It's very old. It predates the Memorial Gardens. And over on the other side, we've got this funny little palm tree. It's odd to think of palms growing in Ilkley, but this is a very tough palm from China, which can grow at altitudes of over 2,000 meters. And it has these very sharp little spines growing along the stem. Spence Gardens. So this used to be grazing land, and this picture was taken a few years after it was converted to a garden. And you'll see it's grown up a lot since then, got a lot of interesting trees there. And the tree people notice most is the Indian bean tree. Now, this tree looks dead for most of the year. And people worry about it in June when it still hasn't got any leaves on. I think it must be dead. But then it develops these huge leaves. That's a 20p piece next to the leaf, followed by beautiful flowers. And I've said in the tree trail for the town centre that some of these Indian bean trees produce long brown pods, but I've never seen any on this tree. I was quite shocked a few weeks ago to walk past it and see it was absolutely covered in beans. I don't know if this is an unusual year or if I've just missed them for the last 30 years. Also in Spence Gardens, we have some Japanese maples. Some of you may have heard of Paul Wood, who's the author of several books on street trees in London, and he's now working on a volume about street trees throughout the UK. And he came to Ilkley recently, and Neil and I took him around some of our trees. And I thought he'd be impressed by the bean tree, but actually he was most impressed by our Japanese maples. He thinks they're really quite special. And also in Spence Gardens, we have not so attractive, but two very big trees of heaven. The leaves of these trees are supposed to smell horrible, but I can't smell them at all. So what about our street trees? Let's look at the car park, the Grove and the Pocket Park. So UK towns were very late coming to the idea of planting trees in streets. Trees had been planted as avenues for walking or horse riding in country estates and used by the wealthy for a very long time. But the idea of trees for people really came about in France, where they planted street trees in the 17th century, then spread to Italy and gradually to the UK. But to start with, these were just avenues that people promenaded up and down. They weren't in the commercial centres at all. But in the late 18th and early 19th century, you started to get trees and shops together in spa towns in the south of England, like Tunbridge Wells and Cheltenham. Most towns in England had no street trees at all until Victorian times. And Ilkley benefited from being a spa town. So here's Brook Street in the 1860s, no trees at all. Here's the Grove in the 1870s. You can just see the trees at the end of Mill Gill coming down here, but no trees lining the street itself. And then by the early 1900s, the shops have been built on the north side of the road, and we've got trees. We actually have quite a lot of trees lining the car park. So this is a pillar apple, it's a type of crab apple, and these crab apples stay on the tree most of the winter. Got a nice silver birch. Got several beautiful silver maples. We've got Norway maple, bird cherry, and paper bark birch. Going on to the Grove, we've got the purple Norway maple, and next to it, this huge walnut tree, which has lots of fruit on it. I gather there's quite a lot of competition to see who can get the fruits to eat. And then we've got the cherries on the Grove. So the Grove was planted with cherries in the late 1950s. And the council planned to cut them down in 1991 and replace them with pear trees, but there were a lot of local upset, and the trees were saved then. But in 2004, they had come to the end of their lives. And so a lot of them on the Bettis side of the road were removed and planted with new cherries. These are not native cherries, these are Japanese flowering cherries. You've still got some of the original cherries from the 1950s outside Nora's. And then we've got trees of various ages on the other side of the road. The newest planted in 2020 after an old tree was blown down. And then we've got the yew on the Grove. This is a male yew, it doesn't have berries, but it's got these male pollen cones, which you can see through the winter. Pocket Park. So this is the latest addition to trees and green spaces in Ilkley. Pocket parks are very trendy now. A lot of towns are going in for them. So Commute Cafe contributed something to this, but Bradford Council spent £35,000 on this, which sounds a lot. It's to attract bikers. It's got a covered bike rack and some seating. And there's a few trees planted here and these tubs and beds, which are a lot more advanced than when I took this picture. I think it looks quite good now. It had a lot of negative press to start with. It's reported in the paper that youths were gathering there to drink and take drugs and abuse the passers-by. I haven't seen any of that. I hadn't realised what it replaced, because I think a lot of people were a bit upset about this pocket park. This is what it looked like before, picture from Google. So not a very interesting space, but it was green. If we go back to the previous picture, we've actually replaced the green by a lot of concrete and tarmac, although it looks quite attractive, which is not really the idea of Pocket Park. So I think the Civic Society have been quite upset about the way it was done. But as I say, pocket parks are very trendy all over the world. So in a lot of big cities, there's a lot of effort going into changing concrete jungles into parks, green spaces. So this is Shanghai. This is an example from America. Here's a pocket park in London. And I thought this was an interesting idea from Singapore. So they had a day when you could rent a car parking space, but instead of parking your car there, you could turn it into a green space for the day, just to try and show what the city could be like if there were more green areas. I think it's a nice idea. We could do it in the car park here. In fact, it would be nice if the whole of the car park became a park with trees, hedges, outdoor seating, but I don't suppose that will happen. We have a lot of interesting trees in private gardens. I'm just going to show 3 examples near the Grove. So we've got this red snake bark maple, which has very interesting bark. There's a eucalyptus tree just off the Grove. And a cedar of Lebanon in Queen's Road. So I don't know if that will stay there much longer, because when Neil and I went to look at this tree, a lady rushed out, very excited, and asked if we were the people who'd come to see about cutting it down. She was a bit disappointed when we said we were just there to admire it. So who actually looks after our trees? Well, the trees in public places are responsibility of Bradford Council. Bradford has been awarded the title of Tree City of the World. There are only 3 or 4 cities in the UK that have got this award. It's not awarded for the number of trees you've got, but it's you're awarded for the intention to plant trees. The government have given Bradford £15,000 so that a tree can be planted for every primary school child. And this was featured on national news. Anita Rani was in Bradford planting trees with people. Bradford does have a woodland strategy, which came out in 2012. It's a little bit underwhelming, and it should have been reviewed in 2017, but hasn't been yet. They've also got a document called Homes and Neighbourhood Design Guide, which has quite a bit about how to make streets attractive, in particular how to have trees and green spaces in cities. Then there's the Ilkley Moor Management Plan, which I've mentioned. Trees on public land, from a practical point of view, are managed by the Tree and Woodland section of the Sport and Culture Service in Bradford. And they've got a database of 28,000 trees, that's for the whole of Bradford, which are supposed to be inspected every 18 months or so. But Bradford Tree Department is very understaffed, and there's no way they can inspect trees every 18 months. So I see that some of them are only being inspected every 4 years now. And this database, it's got a lot of information on it, but it's mainly concerned with tree safety. So Bradford want to know that trees on the streets are not going to fall down and injure people, rather than whether they're nice trees or any interesting information about them. Then there are tree preservation orders and trees in conservation areas, which are managed by the Planning Service Trees team. So there's two separate departments within Bradford Council. And due to understaffing, a lot of the tree preservation orders are not really followed through. Two new things, Ilkley Tree Talk has come to Bradford. So it's just been renamed Green Talk. And this is started by a company that's based in London. For London, they've got an app which shows all the public trees in London, and you can click on a tree on the map on the app, and it will tell you what that tree is and give you some information about the species. And it will, if you want to do a tree walk, it'll design a walk for you around the area that you're in. And they're spreading out to other towns now, and Bradford have agreed to trial it in Ilkley. So that's under development at the moment, which will be quite exciting, I think. And then there's Trees for Streets. This is a national sponsorship scheme that Bradford have signed up to. This is an online app where you can, if you want a tree planted in your street, you can tell the council what you want planted and where, and they'll come and assess the site. And if they agree it's suitable, you make a donation and agree to water the tree, and then they'll plant it. So they're estimating that planting a street tree costs about £500. If you donate £150 and agree to water the tree, then it will only cost the council about £250. So they can get 2 trees for the price of 1. That's active in Bradford at the moment, but I don't know if any individuals or companies have actually started using it. There are lots of other groups apart from the council who are interested in our trees. So the Friends of Ilkley Riverside Park, Climate Action Ilkley, Friends of Ilkley Moor, the Civic Society. The Ilkley Town Council have the Neighbourhood Development Plan and the Ilkley Sustainability Plan, both of which mention trees, although not in great depth. They say they want to maintain existing street trees, and where they have to be removed, replace them. Then there are residents who are responsible for their own trees. And a new thing is the Ilkley Trees Initiative. So this is a group of people who want to work with the town council to try and develop a strategy for protecting the trees we already have and thinking about new planting in Ilkley. So what is actually happening to our trees in Ilkley? Well, there is some new planting going on. So Climate Action Ilkley have planted community orchards in East Holmesfield and also over at Ben Redding, and those trees seem to be doing well. The Friends of Riverside Park have done some planting. Climate Action Ilkley are involved in developing the Playhouse slope to make it more wildlife friendly, and local schools are involved in planting. So that's all very good, but we have to contend with disease, death, neglect and destruction. So I've mentioned ash dieback and the disease that's affecting larch. There's also a disease affecting oak called acute oak decline. And with climate change, we're likely to see more diseases appearing. Ash dieback is really going to kill millions of trees throughout the country. It's going to transform the landscape. Death. A lot of our trees are old. They're planted by the Victorians and the Edwardians, and they're coming to the end of their lives. I know friends of Ilkley Moor have tried to replant Scots pine because the trees on the moor are dying, but that has not been successful. And then there's neglect. So the trees on the grove aren't really looked after very well. The trees haven't been pruned for a very long time. The cages around them, which were to protect them when they were younger, should have been removed years ago. The trees are now growing round the structures and digging into the bark. We've told the council about this and they said they would remove them, but that was over a year ago. There's quite a lot of pavement damage going on. Not really the fault of the tree, it's because it wasn't planted properly in the first place. And this is, I think it's a cherry tree on the grove, which is dead. It was inspected by the Bradford team in February and passed as being in good condition. But I don't know if the dry weather has killed it. But it's not due for re-inspection for another 4 years. And destruction. So this is a Google image. This is a property in the conservation area, which had a lovely beech hedge and trees behind it. The planning permission stated that the hedge should remain. This is what it looks like now. This was a cherry tree on the grove. It's now an asphalt square. I think it's quite common through Ilkley that hedges and small trees are being replaced by fences. And this is another Google picture of a lime tree on the grove, over 100 years old. Cut down a few weeks ago, and this is all that's left of it now. It's said to have outgrown its site, which may be true. But if you cut down an urban tree like this, it's over 100 years old, the Woodland Trust say it needs to be replaced with at least 3 new trees. I don't know what the plans are for the tree. The street is a very difficult environment for trees, very hostile, have little growing space, compacted soil, they're subject to a lot of pollution, vandalism, but the biggest problem for our street trees is actually drought. They can't get enough water. So in summary, we have a good urban forest in Ilkley. We're very lucky. There are a lot of benefits to having urban trees, and some of our trees are being cared for, but many are not. And I think at the moment we're losing more trees than we're planting. And I think it would be nice to have a visionary tree strategy for Ilkley. And that's the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. That's a great tour around the trees we're lucky to have in Ilkley. I adore seeing them, but my ID is rubbish, so it's nice to have the tree trails to help identify what they are. We've got a few questions in, room for a few more if people wish to, but I'll start with the ones that we've got. You mentioned just towards the end there that one or two of the trees are struggling because they've not been planted correctly in the pavement. What would be the correct way of avoiding that, of avoiding the damage to the pavement as they grow?
Well, usually they've not been given enough space. I mean, when you look at a tree, what you see above, there's the same amount is going to be below the ground, and they need space for the roots to spread out. And there are companies now that specialize in urban tree planting, and they use a lot of whizzy technology to work out exactly how much soil a particular tree needs and how much water it needs. And they have equipment that makes sure the roots go down a bit before they go sideways. But it's very expensive. And I think
so much of it comes back to cost. I was quite shocked when you said the next inspection for the dead one on the grove is 4 years' time, which is tricky. You mentioned a fair bit about the local council having responsibility, so we're clearly in Bradford Council. How does the tree position compare in Otley, which is part of Leeds, or Skipton within North Yorkshire?
I don't think I can answer that. I don't know.
Okay. There's one for NATS members to go and research at some point in coming times. We've got people in those places, certainly. How much around the town, or perhaps a little further afield, do we see inappropriate tree planting, either in the wrong place or at the wrong density, not managed subsequently, that kind of thing?
I think there's quite a lot that aren't looked after once they're planted. I mentioned watering, that's really important, because 1 in 3 new street trees die in the first 2 years, and it's usually because they just haven't managed to get enough water. So a lot of towns are developing adopt a tree scheme, so local people can take on the job of actually watering the tree, because you can't really expect the council to come round every few weeks and water the trees. They just don't have the manpower to do it.
Certainly seen evidence of that of the community orchard at Benridding. People out in the late spring this year when it was dry, watering the orchard. It does seem to have made a difference, as you say. They seem to have taken quite well.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's a massive range, clearly, from your talk of different trees in Ilkley. Do you think that helps us biodiversity-wise and the different species that live on them, or are a large percentage non-native and therefore actually have a relatively limited biodiversity value?
Well, I think we have got plenty of native ones, but even the non-native ones, I'm sure they're good for a lot of creatures. Yeah, I don't think we should dismiss trees just because they're not native trees.
Sure. Okay. The last question I've got for now is about the regeneration you mentioned earlier on Ilkley Moor, and about that being on the lower slopes at the moment, so likely not really affecting ground nesting birds. But there's also the aspect of tree planting is so expensive. Doesn't it make sense to, at least on large parts of the moor and in the gills, allow natural regen as a cheaper way of increasing tree cover?
Oh, well, I think it is, yes. But whether that affects the moor's status as an SSI, I don't know. I don't know how much tree growth could be allowed before that status is taken away.
It's a fascinating one, the designation of SSIs and what's allowed and what's not on them, and some of the almost counterintuitive steps that it encourages people to make, and kind of sense would suggest otherwise sometimes, but that's a whole other minefield that we perhaps best not go into. Thanks for that, sir. I'll pass you back to Helen to sum up.
Sorry, I'm having trouble getting my video on. Oh, there we go. horrible moment. I thought I might not be able to appear at all. Yes, so it falls to me to undertake the very pleasant task of thanking Sue for a really fantastic talk. I mean, as someone who probably isn't as observant as I should be about the trees that are around Ilkley, I just sort of have this general impression of loveliness, that we do have some beautiful trees, but it was absolutely wonderful to be taken through so systematically an account of what trees we have, in what places, where are the the concentrations of trees to be found, which are the particularly interesting ones to look out for. Absolutely wonderful. And not only that, of course, but Sue put it into context so well for us. Was a bit dismayed. I hadn't really realised, I suppose, how poorly the UK was faring in terms of overall tree cover. I suppose being early in the Industrial Revolution hasn't helped us in that respect, and especially, of course, in the north, where the figures were really quite staggering, how little tree cover there actually is. And as Sue's mentioned, of course, there's an awful lot to contend with ash dieback especially, but all sorts of other tree diseases, and generally speaking, difficulties for trees thriving in an urban environment. So I guess the message we have to take away is that we all need to be trying to play our part, both individually. I mean, perhaps we could adopt trees for our own streets, using the scheme that Sue told us about in the talk. And in general, supporting the efforts that various organisations and indeed the council themselves are undertaking to try to protect and improve the tree environment in Ilkley and the towns around, no doubt as well. So thank you very much, Sue. It was a lovely talk, and I think a lot of us will have learned a great deal from it. I also just want to mention the next talk. The next meeting is going to be in 2 weeks' time. That's going to be on October the 12th, I think it is. And we're going to have Jim Butterfield talking to us on Aldo Leopold, his life, work and legacy. So it would be really lovely to see as many people as possible coming back for that. I really hope you've all enjoyed tonight's talk as much as I have. I'm sure that you will have done. Thank you very much, Sue.